back, it's Christina again with the Artist Pod, and today we're going to talk about how to sketch eyes. So, sketching in general can be a little daunting, I know, because you want to make sure everything looks right, that your perspectives are right, that, you have everything kind of in the right place, but what changed my ability to sketch, I think it was about halfway through college when I had the epiphany that everything's measurable. So, I always draw one thing. I choose a feature of anything I'm drawing, whether it's a landscape or it's a person or whatever it is. I draw one thing first, and I'm very careful on how I draw it, and then that becomes my unit of measurement. So for people, when I'm drawing a human, I choose an eye. I choose the left eye. It's on the right side, and that's always how I start, and that eye becomes my system of measurement for the rest of the composition. For animals, if their eyes are too small, which happens in some cases, not always, some animals, their eyes are big enough I can use them. I'll use their nose instead, particularly with like a bison. Their eyes are really tiny in comparison to the rest of their face. And then I just measure that features, right? So I'm sure you've seen it where you see an artist kind of extending their hand and they're twisting it and they're doing, kind of looking like this. When they're doing that, what they're doing is you are measuring using the end of the pen and then using your finger and adjusting your finger to that whatever that object is, however long or however high it is. And then once you measure that feature, you can measure how that feature relates to everything else. So for instance, one thing that's a pretty common measurement in 99.9% of people, if they are looking at you, our eyes are an eye width apart. Now, that's not always true. Every once in a while you'll find someone whose eyes are just a little closer together, just a little further apart. But 9 times out of 10, eyes are an eye width apart. And so if I'm not drawing a specific person, I'm drawing someone generic, I use that rule. Eyes are an eye width apart. I know that. And then the other eye is going to be the same length as the first eye. And so you have that unit of measurement to get the eye lengths right. And then if someone, again, it relies on someone looking straight out at you, typically the measurement to the edge of the face is half an eye width, and sort of so on and so forth. And so you just measure it out, and you have the eye to be your unit of measurement. So, all right, so let's get started. Okay, so like I said, first thing we're going to do is we're going to draw the first eye. It's always the left eye for me, but you can choose whatever you want. When I'm sketching, which I've talked about before, but you don't have to be, like, I make these very sketchy lines. I do it even when I'm filling it in, right? Like, it doesn't have to be, and you can see, I actually don't have good muscle strength when I come underneath. It's more evident when we go to shadow in the eye. So you don't have to worry about having this one swoop to get the eye shape right. It's not a circle. It's not a full oval. It pinches down on this side. It pinches down, but it's not to a point. We're on a rounded, both corners of our eyes are rounded, so you're never going to see our eyes come down to a perfect point. But it's more pinched on this side than it is on this side, which is going to be wider. The top swoop of the eye is typically going to be a bigger or a more pronounced circle than underneath, which is typically not as pronounced, but there is a little bit of circling that happens underneath. So, and everybody's eye shapes are different, but both eyes, even though they'll mirror each other very closely, they're not perfect. They're not perfectly symmetrical in that, our eye shapes aren't the same from one eye to the other. There is going to be some variation. So don't feel pressure to make both eyes perfectly exactly the same. Although they need to be relatively similar, they don't have to be identical. Right, so we start with the eye, and then I add the eyelid over top of it, that little sort of line there. Again, that kind of follows that upper swoop, and depending on the emotion you're adding, you'll want that thinner or thicker. And then for a point of reference for me, I tend to like to draw the little section right here underneath, just to kind of help me sort of solidify where it is in space. That helps, as well as adding the spot over here, because our eyes, once we start shadowing it, I'll talk about it a bit more, but our eyes it's basically a ball sitting in a circular recess in our heads, right? So this helps me sort of solidify those sorts of proportions. And then I draw iris and then the pupil. Now, you'll note that even though I'm sketching it, I've kind of already decided, or when I was sketching this, I decided where the light source was going to be because I didn't finish the circle, right? Otherwise, I would have finished the circle out, but I didn't do that because I'm leaving a gap to assume that my highlight will be here, and if my highlight's here, my light source is coming from this side and in front of, just like we talked about in the other highlight and shadow video. Again, I'll talk about that later. So even though all I'm to is the sketching phase on the eye, in some ways I've already kind of decided where my light source will be. Now again, it's just the sketch, so I could easily change it. But while I was sketching it, I kind of had that in mind. And then I add the line here for the little pink fleshy thing that we have in our eyes. And then, so again, eyes are an eye width apart. So if you take this eye, now it's digital art, so it's a little easier, but if you take that eye and put it to the end of this one, and then draw the next one out, it comes to the edges there. And then we would remove that middle one, and we have two eyes that are an eye width apart. The shape isn't identical. You can kind of see there's little differences here, but that's normal. And then we'll do the same thing. We'll add the eyelid, the sort of recess underneath, and on the other side, we'll add the, I think it's the iris, the pupil, and the line for the pink fleshy thing. And so typically when I'm sketching eyes, the last thing I do is I add the eyebrows, right, over both eyes. So when you're sketching or drawing hair, and we'll go more in depth into that, you draw in the direction of the hair. So when I'm sketching an eyebrow, it's, you're making these marks in the direction the hair would be growing. So, I wouldn't, although you can, I wouldn't like fill the whole thing in, although people can do that. But if you want a sort of a textured look to the hair, you'll want to make those lines as the hair goes back. That'll add the textured effect once you do it. All right, so again, you don't have to make it all in one swoop, and you can see that the eyes aren't exactly the same shape, right? Like this one is wider on this side, this one's narrower. They're both the same length though, and their eyelids are a little different. This one is swooping in a slightly different angle than that one. The top of their eyes are similar, but there are some differences. I think this one's a little bit more circular. The bottom on this one's more circular than this one, but that's fine. It still will read as the same person. Those minor variations are common. And again, when you're sketching, you don't have to be worried about, actually, let me just try a different layer. You don't have to be worried about making like one big swoop to make an eye. You can just, you're just gonna come up, have a little bit of a top portion there, bring it back down into this rounded section, and then we're gonna have the bottom, which won't be quite as rounded as the top. You'll have the eyelid that kind of mimics the same line as the top of the eye. When I get to this section, you'll note that I didn't bring it down with it. I sort of start opening it up once I get over here. You want the line for the pink fleshy section, the sort of the lines under the eyes. You want that section that indicates the eyes bulging out right there. You don't want to have an eye that you can see all the way around. I mean, you can. It depends on the emotion you want to pull into it. If you don't want it looking shocked, you don't want to do that. So your eye, when you're drawing it, and you'll notice on the other ones that I did too, had the same thing. It's the top of the eye is going to block off part of our eye. The eyelid's we're not going to be able to see the whole thing because we're not shocked. So the wider you want the eye, the more of that you would show. And then, you want the pupil kind of in between, and this would be where the highlight would go. And there you go, you have an eye. And then you want the eyebrow to be, you would just draw kind of in that direction. You don't want it too close but not too far away. I probably made it a little too high here. And it can look a little sloppy at first, especially depending on how thick you're going to do the eyes. But it'll always kind of come out to roughly this point, and then it'll curve down. So you'll have the eye that, just sort of comes over, and then it'll curve down with the eye. And that's how you sketch out an eye. Alright, so that's how you sketch an eye. I hope that made sense, and I wasn't too confusing when I was trying to talk about it. I know that I can geek out about drawing, and sometimes I get excited about doing something. But that's how you would do a rough sketch of one. And next time we'll talk about how to shadow that in. So we'll take those same eyes and we'll add highlights and shadows to them, and you can kind of see how I would do that, and how you would break down, how you can break down a more complicated form by its simpler shapes, and then how you would sort of think about highlights and shadows from there. And yeah, if you like this video, please like and subscribe. Thank you so much. I will see you all next Thursday. Take care.